Hey everybody, this is TJR. Over the weekend, you're probably already aware of this, Adam West, the man probably always referred to by the media as TV's original Batman, passed away. And I understand he died from a bout of leukemia. And I have a long history and a long affinity with the Batman character ever since I was a kid. I can't remember if I ever saw Batman comics, on magazine stands or on comic racks when I was a kid, but I'm pretty sure my first exposure to the character was from the TV show that starred Adam West. I would have been just a little kid at this time, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and at the time I took that show absolutely, completely seriously. I loved the show. My parents, I remember, got me a Batman costume that I played in. And I had a little push-pedal go-kart that my dad painted a bat insignia on so that could be my Batmobile. Some years went by, not a lot, but a few years went by, and you get older. And I began to enter my early teens when I started to actually read comic books. I became very curious about them. My first comic book was Superman, and then I read Batman. And when I read Batman, I just couldn't believe what I was reading. This would have been the early 70s. Writers like Denny O'Neil was writing the series, and artists like Neil Adams and Dick Giordano were drawing the books. And this Batman that I was reading in the comics was totally unlike the TV show Batman. He wasn't living in a mansion. He was living in a penthouse apartment. There was no Robin in sight. There were no costume villains like the Penguin, at least not yet. And this Batman was a lot harder and tougher and was dealing with real street crime and real criminals, It kind of blew me away reading this as a kid, such a young and impressionable kid. And you see, what had happened is I had jumped on board the comic book series when DC's editorial staff was doing everything they could to move the character as far away as possible from the campy TV series. At this point in my life, I was raised in a mostly middle-class suburban neighborhood. I was raised in a fairly strict and disciplined Roman Catholic upbringing and was, for the most part, mostly sheltered by the harsh realities of the world around me. So when I read these Batman comics, my reaction was, this Batman in the comic books is badass. Of course, I couldn't say that as a kid. I could get in trouble if I did. But as a 9 or maybe 10-year-old kid, I suddenly felt way more hip and, street smart than I'd ever felt before, if you can imagine that. It was like I'd made the leap from Disney films to Quentin Tarantino films, had they existed back then. But the sad thing for me at this time was that any time I brought up Batman to anyone, basically everyone would laugh at me because all they knew about the character was the 60s TV show. And so, like a lot of comic book fans, I went from really loving the Adam West Batman TV show to really resenting it and even hating it and even refusing to watch it. It wasn't until sometime in the early 90s or so when a much older comic fan, a friend, shared with me his love for the old TV show. The only problem was that the show just wasn't available commercially, and it remained that way for a long time. He had a few bootleg tapes that he had me rewatch, some of it with him, and I began to see that there was a sharper and funnier and even more adult side to the show that I just couldn't catch as a kid. We watched the theatrical movie and from the late 60s, and I about died laughing, when Adam West exclaimed that great line, "Sometimes you just can't get rid of a bomb." Now, this all would have been after Frank Miller's seminal graphic novel Batman The Dark Knight Returns, and sometime after the first, Tim Burton Batman film. I still loved The Dark Knight, but with a little help from my friend, I found myself starting to reappreciate the TV show. Now, in the 90s, there was a TV series, Batman the Animated Series, which I still think is, the best film iteration of the character. And Batman is trying to solve a series of crimes that are patterned after the plots of an old superhero TV show called The Gray Ghost that Bruce Wayne remembered watching as a kid. In this episode, Adam West voiced the part of Simon Trent. a washed-up, out-of-work actor whose career has stalled because he starred in the Grey Ghost series as the title character that Bruce watched as a kid. And he's been typecast and can't get any more work.
Hello?
Yeah, it's me, Si. Bad news, you didn't get the part.
I need to work, Frankie. Get me something. You're my agent.
There are some really great moments in this episode where you hear so much desperation and misery in Adam West's performance. And of course, there was no way you could have anyone else but Adam West play this part in this episode of this particular series. Any other actor, and you just wouldn't have that same level of resonance. At the end of the episode, the fictional actor, Simon Trent, begins to experience a career revival as a result of the publicity of his involvement in this particular case that Batman is working on. And this publicity leads to the re-release of the original Grey Ghost TV show on DVD. At the end of the episode, Bruce Wayne asks Simon Trent to sign a copy of the DVD for him and tells him, "You are my boyhood hero." And the interesting thing about this is that this episode of this animated series pretty much mirrors what began to happen to Adam West in real life. He began to experience a real career revival. He appeared on The Simpsons. He appeared in a number of various comedy skit and comedy sitcom shows. He began to appear in TV commercials. In the later 2006 Batman animated series entitled simply The Batman, he had the recurring role of Mayor Grange, the mayor of Gotham City, and also on the animated sitcom Family Guy as Mayor Adam West. And I really do think that a lot of what was happening was that you had this whole generation of younger showrunners, writers, and creators who grew up watching him in the original series and wanted his comedic talents on their respective shows. And kind of like the character of Bruce Wayne in the aforementioned Grey Ghost episode, they wanted to meet their childhood hero. In spite of all this, for a very long time, the work that he was best known for was just simply unavailable commercially. This was due to rights issues between 20th Century Fox, who owned the TV show, and Warner Brothers, who owned the character. I'm really glad that all of this got worked out and that Adam West got to see and participate in the release of the original TV series on Blu-ray and DVD before his passing. And it was at the time of the release of the original series on Blu-ray and DVD that I was contacted by another YouTuber who goes by the handle of Captain Logan, who has a great channel called Geekvolution. And he asked me if he could use my rock instrumental remake of the Batman TV show theme that I had released about a year or so ago on iTunes and Amazon. I took the original theme and expanded it into a longer instrumental, rock, guitar instrumental piece. And he just asked if he could use it in his analysis of the top 10 episodes of the original series. And I was familiar with his work. He's done some great film analysis. And so I said, of course, go ahead and use it. And you can catch those videos on YouTube. I recommend them to you. His videos gave me an even greater appreciation for the TV show, and so much so that I went out and picked up my own copy of the release on Blu-ray, and I have really been enjoying watching those. I find that a lot of these episodes I only had just, really vague memories of. And I also find I see them with completely different set of eyes now that I'm an adult. There's a lot of comedy in this original show that I think, oh my gosh, I can't believe they got away with that back then. And anyways, though, like I said, for so many years, I just, resented the show, but I'm glad that I was able to come around and be able to reappreciate it again and appreciate the great work of Adam West and everybody else in the cast. Hollywood is such a different animal now than it was then. And I don't think actors are as prone to being typecast as they were back then. Back then, it could be really tragic for an actor if you got, typecast. I know that Adam West did go through a very tough period there at one point where he was mostly unemployable due to this. And I'm glad that he did live long enough to rise above it, and that he didn't have to experience the kind of tragedy that an actor like George Reeves, TV's original Superman, had to experience. I'm also glad that he got to finally reprise the role again, something he always wanted to do, even going back to the 80s, back to the late 80s with the first Tim Burton Batman film. I remember reading interviews where he mentioned that a number of times he wished he could have reprised the role. And he did get to reprise the role in the animated feature Return of the Caped Crusader, which I did review on this channel. And I think the main thing I said about it, I'll leave a link for the review, but mainly I said that watching this film, made me feel happy. Yes, I do love the dark, gritty Batman comics and the films, but I also love the deadpan comedy of the Adam West Batman. And I understand that prior to his passing, there was a sequel in the works to Return of the Caped Crusader entitled Batman vs. Two-Face, where William Shatner would be voicing the part of Two-Face. And this was in production, and I hope that his voiceover work was completed so that we can all experience him playing that character yet one more time. Rest in peace, Adam West. We will miss you. This is TJR. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any thoughts you'd like to share, please leave them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.